An elderly freedman sought refuge in a deserted cabin. The enslavers located him, but failed to notice his enormous son. As the overseers forced their way into the wooden dwelling that morning in 1857, dragging old Moses by the neck with a coarse rope, while his wife Ruth collapsed to the floor with her face bloodied, not one of them suspected another soul resided there. Big Samuel was deep in the forest, tracking a deer miles away when his existence was irrevocably altered. Coming back in the late afternoon, he discovered the door smashed in, furniture wrecked, and his mother slumped in a corner of the shack, scarcely able to utter a word. Through moans of agony and weeping, Ruth recounted everything to him. The men from the Whitmore estate had ultimately located his father. She recalled snippets of conversation she'd accidentally heard. References to bringing the translator back, about 30 years of deprivation, about a plantation a 3-day journey south. Big Samuel observed his mother's shaking hands, noticed the dried blood staining the wooden floor, and something within him fractured. Towering over 7 feet tall, possessing 25 years of brutal instruction from his own father's hands, he now harbored a singular mission: bring Moses back. Whether alive or deceased was irrelevant, as was the number of adversaries he'd have to confront. Those overseers remained oblivious, but they had just roused something that ought to have stayed concealed in the forest forever. Before we proceed with this remarkable tale of vengeance, remember to subscribe and share your city in the comments. Let's carry on. The aroma of cotton and sweat had constituted Moses's entire existence for his first 30 years. Each morning preceding dawn, each evening following the last glimmer of light, he labored in the fields of the Whitmore plantation in interior South Carolina. His hands recognized the texture of cotton bolls, the heft of the picking sack, the bite of the overseer's lash across his shoulders when his pace lagged. But Moses stood apart from the rest, and Master Whitmore recognized it. He commanded 3 languages: English from the plantation, French from a traveling merchant who'd spent 2 summers trading with Whitmore, and sufficient Spanish acquired from Charleston dock workers to negotiate prices and terms. This rendered Moses invaluable, worth more than 10 field hands combined. Master Whitmore utilized him to impress foreign purchasers, translate contracts, and finalize deals that other plantation owners could only envision. Moses generated thousands in profit, yet being valuable meant being monitored, perpetually monitored. In 1827, during a commercial excursion to Charleston, Moses made his decision. Master Whitmore and his overseers had intoxicated themselves senseless in a dockside tavern, commemorating a particularly lucrative tobacco transaction. Moses waited until their snores rattled the windows, then simply slipped away into the night. He didn't flee north like most fugitives. The northern routes were watched, patrolled, hazardous. Instead, Moses headed west toward the mountains where white men rarely ventured, and the landscape could consume a person entirely. For 3 weeks, he moved solely after dark, resting in hollow trees and rocky overhangs. He consumed wild onions and roots, drank from streams, and left no fires, no footprints, no evidence. The knowledge of 3 languages proved worthless in the wilderness. Here, survival hinged on silence, patience, and the capacity to become unseen. When Moses finally ceased his flight, he was over 200 miles from the Whitmore plantation, deep in mountainous territory where trees grew so densely that sunlight barely penetrated the forest floor. With an axe he'd taken from an abandoned homestead, he constructed a cabin, modest and concealed among massive oaks and pines, nestled in a hollow where one could pass within 50 yards and never perceive it. The initial 3 years proved the most challenging. Moses hunted with snares and a crude bow he'd fashioned from hickory. He cultivated a small garden, burying the vegetables under leaves to conceal them from view. Each night he strained to hear the sound of horses, of dogs, of men shouting his name, yet they never came. By the 4th year, Moses started to believe he might genuinely be free. That's when he encountered Ruth. She was laundering clothes in a stream about 3 miles from his cabin when he first spotted her. Daughter of freed slaves who'd established a small community in a valley, even more secluded than his own. She possessed strong hands, a direct gaze, and scars on her wrists that indicated she understood what he'd escaped. They didn't exchange life stories or pose questions that might yield painful answers. They simply coexisted. By winter, Ruth had relocated to the cabin. By spring, they'd wedded beneath the stars with no clergyman, no documents, only pledges. In 1832, Big Samuel was born. Moses held his son for the first time and sensed something shift within his chest. This child would never experience chains, would never know the flavor of fear that accompanied being someone's property. Yet Moses also recognized the truth: freedom was fragile. Master Whitmore was the sort who never forgot a debt, never forgave a loss. Thus Moses commenced teaching his son to endure. Big Samuel grew like nothing Ruth had ever witnessed. By age 8, he matched the height of grown women in their community. By 12, he stood eye to eye with his father. By 15, he dwarfed every man Moses had ever known, over 7 feet of sinew and bone with hands capable of snapping branches as thick as a man's wrist. But Moses didn't merely instruct his son in strength. He taught him to think. Size makes you a target, Moses explained one morning as they inspected rabbit snares in the forest. The pine needles crunched softly beneath their feet, and somewhere above a crow issued a warning. White men see a large black man, and they perceive a threat. They see something to shatter, to shackle, to ruin. So you learn to be invisible when necessary, and when invisibility isn't an option, you learn to become so dangerous they regret ever laying eyes on you. Big Samuel absorbed every lesson. How to track deer by the way grass bent and retained moisture. How to navigate brush without a sound by placing each foot carefully and testing before applying weight. How to recognize plants, which ones mended wounds, which could induce sleep, which could kill. How to fight with knives, with clubs, with bare hands. How to shoot with the old rifle Moses had traded 3 deer hides to obtain. Beyond techniques, Moses imparted perspective. White men follow patterns. Son, Moses said one night by the fire. The flames cast dancing shadows across his weathered face, and the scent of cooking rabbit permeated the small cabin. They believe themselves unpredictable, but they're not. They drink at consistent times, tire at consistent times, trust their weapons more than their instincts. And that trust is weakness disguised as strength. Big Samuel listened, remembered, and understood. When Big Samuel turned 16, Ruth finally disclosed the complete truth about his father's history. About the Whitmore plantation, about Moses's actual name, Benjamin, though they never used it. About the 30 years of flight, of concealment, of perpetually glancing over their shoulders. Your father sacrificed everything so you could be born free, Ruth said, her hands working a needle through leather as she repaired Big Samuel's hunting vest. Never forget that, and never let anyone take it away. Big Samuel looked at his father across the cabin. Moses was 55 now, hair more gray than black, face etched with years of sun and worry, but his eyes remained sharp, watchful, free. I won't, Mama, Big Samuel promised. He had no inkling how soon he'd be put to the test. The morning of the assault, Big Samuel departed before dawn to track a deer he'd spotted 2 days earlier. The animal bore a distinctive mark, one antler shorter than the other, and Big Samuel had been patient, learning its routes, its feeding times, awaiting the perfect shot. He was 3 miles into the forest when his father's cabin was destroyed. There were 5 of them. Moses was outside splitting wood when they arrived, 4 overseers on horseback, and one man Moses recognized even after 30 years. Clayton, the head overseer from Whitmore Plantation, now grizzled and scarred, yet still carrying the same cruel intelligence in his eyes. "Well, well," Clayton said, dismounting slowly. The leather of his saddle creaked, and his horse snorted, catching Moses's fear. "Benjamin, or should I say Moses, Master Whitmore's been searching for you a long time, 30 years. You cost him a fortune." Moses's hand tightened on the axe handle. 5 armed men, 1 elderly fugitive. The calculation was simple and brutal. "I'm a free man," Moses said quietly. "Have been for 30 years. Clayton laughed, a sound like metal scraping stone. "Free, boy. You were born property and you'll die property. The only question is how much you get beaten before we bring you back." Ruth appeared in the cabin doorway, drawn by the voices. Big Samuel had inherited his size from her family. Her father had been a massive man, but she'd inherited her mother's sharp instincts. She saw the ropes in the overseer's hands and immediately grasped what was unfolding.
"Run, Moses!"
she screamed. Clayton moved fast for an older man. He backhanded Ruth across the face, and she fell hard, her head striking the doorframe. Blood immediately began streaming from a cut above her eye. Moses roared and swung the axe, but he was 55, not 30. One of the overseers fired a pistol into the air, and the explosion froze Moses in place. In that instant of hesitation, 2 men tackled him, driving him into the dirt. They beat him methodically, not to kill. He was too valuable, but to break him fists, boots, a whip across his back. Moses tasted blood and dirt and something else. The bitter flavor of slavery he'd thought he'd left behind forever. Clayton threw a rope around Moses's neck, pulled it tight. "Master Whitmore's going to be real happy. Says he's got 30 years of work to collect. You're going to die in his fields, Benjamin, knowing you never should have run." They dragged Moses to a horse, tied his hands, looped the neck rope to the saddle. Ruth lay in the doorway, conscious but unable to move, blood pooling beneath her head. She watched them take her husband and couldn't even scream. Before they left, Clayton kicked over their water barrel, trampled Ruth's garden, broke their table and chairs, erasing 30 years of freedom in 30 minutes of violence. "Anyone asks about you," Clayton told the bleeding woman, "you tell them Moses went back where he belongs. And if you're smart, you'll forget you ever knew him." Then they rode south, dragging Moses behind them like an animal on a leash. Ruth lay there for hours. The sun climbed, peaked, and began its descent. Blood dried on her face and in her hair. Her ribs screamed with every breath. At least 2 broken, maybe 3. But she remained conscious, forcing herself to stay alert, to remember everything. She knew her son would come home eventually, and when he did, she needed to tell him all of it. Big Samuel returned at sunset. He'd tracked the deer for 6 hours, but lost it in a rocky area where the trail vanished. Frustrated but not discouraged. Patience was hunting. He headed home with empty hands and plans to try again tomorrow. He smelled blood before he saw the cabin. His walk became a jog, then a sprint. The cabin door hung at an angle, one hinge torn loose. The garden was destroyed. The water barrel lay on its side, its contents soaking into the dirt. And his mother.
"Mama."
Big Samuel dropped to his knees beside Ruth. Her face was swollen, caked with dried blood, one eye nearly shut. She was breathing, but it sounded wet, painful. "Samuel." Ruth's voice was barely a whisper. "They took him. They took your father." Big Samuel's hands trembled as he lifted her carefully, carried her inside to the bed. He'd learned field medicine from his mother. She'd taught him which herbs stopped bleeding, which ones fought infection. Now he worked with mechanical precision, cleaning wounds, binding ribs, all while a cold rage built in his chest like a winter storm. "Tell me everything," he said softly. Ruth talked through the pain, through broken ribs and damaged pride. She described the 5 men, especially Clayton with his scarred face. She repeated their words, especially the crucial ones: Master Whitmore, Whitmore Plantation, 3 days south, near the Savannah River. They said. Ruth coughed, and blood specked her lips. They said he'd work 30 years to pay back what he owes. They said he'd die in the fields. Big Samuel cleaned his hands in a water basin, the liquid turning pink with his mother's blood. He looked at those hands, massive, calloused, capable of both gentleness and violence. His father had trained him for this exact moment, even if neither of them had wanted to admit it. "I'm going to bring him back, Mama. Samuel, they have guns, dogs. There are dozens of them. I have everything Papa taught me." Big Samuel interrupted gently. He began gathering supplies: the rifle, ammunition, dried meat, water skins, his hunting knives. "And I have something they don't expect." "And what's that?" Big Samuel looked at his mother with eyes that had suddenly aged a decade. "They don't know I exist." The trail was insultingly easy to follow. 5 horses, 1 prisoner, moving at a leisurely pace because they weren't worried about pursuit. Why would they be? They'd beaten an old man and a woman. What threat remained? Big Samuel followed at a distance, moving parallel to the main trail, using the forest as cover. His father's training had been thorough. Where to step to avoid noise, which trees provided the best concealment, how to read the land itself to stay invisible. On the second day, he caught up enough to observe them from a ridgeline. Through the trees, he could see his father walking behind a horse, the rope around his neck like a leash. Moses walked with his head down, shoulders slumped, playing the role of broken slave. But Big Samuel knew his father. He knew that posture was calculation, not defeat. Smart, Papa. Make them think you're not worth watching closely. Big Samuel wanted to attack right there. His hands itched for the rifle, to put bullets through all 5 men and end this quickly. But his father's voice echoed in memory. Patience is what separates the living hunter from the dead one. So Big Samuel pulled back and kept following. On the 3rd day, late afternoon, they reached the Whitmore plantation. Big Samuel had never seen anything like it. The main house stood 3 stories tall, white paint gleaming in the sunlight like a temple to wealth built on suffering. Around it spread dozens of smaller buildings, slave quarters, barns, storage sheds, a blacksmith's forge. Beyond those, fields of cotton stretched to the horizon, white and waiting for harvest. And everywhere, people, dozens of slaves moving through the heat, bent over plants or carrying tools or pulling carts. Overseers on horses, rifles across their saddles, whips coiled at their hips. Big Samuel positioned himself on a wooded hill overlooking the plantation. From here, he could see everything. They took Moses directly to a wooden shed near the fields, a punishment building, Big Samuel realized. Heavy door, no windows, built to contain and break. They threw Moses inside, and the door closed with a sound like a coffin lid slamming shut. For the next 2 days, Big Samuel just watched. He counted guards, 7 during the day, 3 at night. He memorized shift changes, noticed which overseers drank heavily, observed which paths they favored for patrols. He saw that dogs were released at dusk, but kenneled after midnight. He noticed the routines of slaves, who worked where, who carried keys, who looked broken, and who still had defiance in their eyes. And on the 3rd night of observation, he saw her, a young woman, maybe 20 years old, washing clothes in the river that bordered the plantation's southern edge. She worked by moonlight alone, her movements efficient, but constantly watchful. There was something in her posture, the set of her shoulders, The way her eyes scanned the darkness, that told Big Samuel she was still fighting, even if only inside. He waited until she moved farther downstream, away from the plantation buildings. Then he emerged from the tree line, moving slowly, hands visible, non-threatening. The woman saw him and froze. Her eyes went wide. This giant of a man appearing from nowhere, dressed in hunting clothes that marked him as free. "Please," Big Samuel whispered. "I'm not here to hurt you. I need your help." The woman's hand tightened on the washing paddle she held. "A weapon if needed. Who are you?" "My name is Big Samuel. 3 days ago they brought my father here. Old man, speaks 3 languages. They're keeping him in the punishment shed." Recognition flickered across her face. The translator. "I heard Master Whitmore celebrating. Said he'd finally gotten back his most valuable property." "What's your name?" "Grace." She glanced nervously toward the plantation. Fires burned in the distance, and she could hear the faint sound of an overseer shouting at someone. "You need to leave, if they catch you." "I'm not leaving without my father," Big Samuel said, still in his voice despite the whisper. "But I can't do this alone. I need information. Guard schedules, where weapons are kept. Anything you can tell me?" Grace studied him for a long moment. In the moonlight, Big Samuel could see scars on her wrists, shackle marks that had never fully healed. Could see the exhaustion in her face, the kind that came from years, not days. "My whole family is here," Grace said finally. "My father Marcus, my mother Sarah, my younger brother David. We've been enslaved here for 15 years. If I help you, if there's a chance." She took a breath. "Can you help us too?" "All of us." Big Samuel thought of his mother broken and bleeding on their cabin floor. Thought of his father chained in a shed after 30 years of freedom. Thought of what those men deserved.
Yes,
he said. "I'll help everyone who wants to be free." Grace's expression hardened with determination. "Then we have work to do." Over the next week, Grace became Big Samuel's bridge to the inside. She would slip away during late work hours, meeting him by the river to share information and coordinate plans. The plantation, Grace explained, held 43 slaves. Most were too terrified to even think about rebellion. They'd seen what happened to those who tried. Last year, Grace told him during their second meeting, her voice hollow with remembered horror. A man named Joshua tried to run. They caught him after 2 days. Master Whitmore had him whipped in front of everyone. 50 lashes. He died before they got to 40. Then Whitmore sold Joshua's wife and 3 children to different plantations. Split them up so they'd never see each other again. He wanted us to know you don't just punish yourself when you rebel. You punish everyone you love. Big Samuel's jaw clenched so hard his teeth ached. "But you're still willing to try." "I'm tired of being afraid," Grace said simply. "And I'm not alone. There's my father, Marcus. He's the blacksmith, strong as an ox, knows how to turn tools into weapons. There's old Thomas, been here 40 years, still remembers how to file through chains. My brother David is fast, carries messages. And my mother Sarah." Grace smiled grimly. "She works in the kitchen with 3 other women. They see everything, hear everything. Master Whitmore trusts them completely because he thinks they're too stupid or too scared to be dangerous." How many would actually fight? Grace counted on her fingers. 15 who would risk everything. Maybe another 10 who would help without fighting, creating distractions, spreading information. The rest, she shrugged, and Big Samuel could see the pain in that gesture. Some are too old, some too young, some too broken. We can't save everyone, Big Samuel. We can only save those willing to die for freedom. The truth hit hard, but Big Samuel accepted it. His father had taught him survival sometimes meant impossible choices. The plan took shape over whispered conversations and careful coordination. They couldn't rely on weapons they didn't have, couldn't produce poison or gunpowder. But they had knowledge of the plantation's rhythms, access to the master's routines, and the element of surprise. Sarah and the kitchen women began their subtle campaign. Nothing obvious, just small additions to the evening meals, extra salt that made the overseers thirsty and irritable. More alcohol poured freely, herbs mixed into stews that caused headaches, drowsiness, mild nausea. Not enough to raise suspicion, but enough to make the white men tired, slower, less sharp. They eat everything we serve. Sarah told Grace with bitter irony. Never question it. They think we're too dumb to hurt them. That arrogance, that's our weapon. Marcus the blacksmith started accidentally weakening equipment. Wagon wheels developed hairline cracks. Bridle straps were filed thin where they wouldn't show. Door hinges loosened just enough. He also began secretly weakening chains, filing through links at night, covering his work with dirt and rust so it looked like natural wear. Old Thomas, who appeared too feeble to threaten anyone, had steady hands and sharp eyes. Each night he spent minutes sawing at the lock mechanism on Moses's punishment shed, using a piece of metal Marcus had smuggled to him. Just a little each time. Patient and invisible. Big Samuel prepared the external attack, using everything his father had taught him. He set traps throughout the plantation's perimeter, hidden ropes at throat height in dark passages, small pits covered with leaves near fence sections, boards with nails concealed under debris on patrol paths, carefully positioned stones that could topple oil lamps at crucial moments. We're not trying to win a battle. Big Samuel explained to Grace and Marcus during a secret meeting in the woods. The smell of pine and earth surrounded them, and somewhere an owl called. We're creating chaos, multiple problems at once, fear and confusion. Then we move during that confusion. When? Marcus asked, his hands scarred from years at the forge, clenched into fists. Soon. A few more days to weaken them, weaken their readiness. Then. But plans don't survive contact with fear. Peter had survived 15 years on the Whitmore plantation by being useful, by being obedient, by never ever making waves. He worked in the main house, close to Master Whitmore himself. He had privileges, better food, lighter work, the occasional coin or word of approval. While others slept in the crowded slave quarters, Peter had a small room in the main house's servant wing. While others wore rags, Peter had clothes without holes. He'd survived by reading the currents of power and swimming with them, never against. So when Peter started noticing the subtle changes, slaves whispering in corners, unusual activity near the punishment shed, the strange exhaustion affecting the overseers, fear gripped him like a vice around his heart. If there was a rebellion and it failed, everyone would suffer, the innocent with the guilty. Master Whitmore didn't distinguish, and Peter had too much to lose. He found Clayton one evening, the head overseer, drinking alone in the barn. The smell of whiskey and hay filled the space. "Sir," Peter said, head bowed, hands clasped, playing the perfect servant. "I need to tell you something." Some of the slaves. "I think they're planning something." Clayton's scarred face turned toward him, eyes sharp despite the alcohol. "Planning what?" "I don't know exactly, sir, but I've seen strange movements. Heard whispers about escape, about violence. I think." Peter added details he'd guessed, trying to seem more helpful, more valuable. "I think it might happen near the stables soon, maybe involving 5 or 6 of the strong ones." Peter didn't know the full plan. Grace and Marcus had been too careful. But he knew enough to sound credible, and he embellished, creating a picture of a small, manageable threat. Clayton didn't wait. That same night, he doubled the guards, added 2 extra patrols, kept lamps burning that usually stayed dark. From his position in the woods, Big Samuel saw the changes immediately. Extra men near the stables, different patrol patterns, a lamp burning in a previously dark section, the same lamp he'd planned to use as a signal point. His heart sank. Someone had talked. The next night, Grace came to their meeting spot in tears. The moonlight caught the tracks on her face, made them shine like scars. "Someone betrayed us," she whispered. "I don't know who, but the overseers are on alert. Some of our people are too scared to continue. They want to wait, maybe months, until things calm down." Big Samuel felt rage threatening to overwhelm his thinking. He wanted to scream, to break things, to attack right now despite the increased guards. But then his father's voice echoed in memory. "When the trap fails, the smart hunter doesn't give up. He adjusts." "No," Big Samuel said firmly. "We don't wait. We adjust the plan."
How?
"They know something is happening, but not what or when exactly. So we feed them false information, make them think the plan is something different, somewhere else, at a different time." Grace wiped her tears, hope rekindling in her eyes. "How do we do that?" "The traitor. They don't know the full plan, right? Only pieces, right? We were careful about compartmentalizing." "Good. So we let different false pieces slip to different people. Make it seem like the escape will happen at the stables on Saturday night. Make it seem like only 5 or 6 people are involved, not 15. Make them prepare for the wrong thing in the wrong place, at the wrong time." Over the next 2 days, they carefully spread misinformation. Grace mentioned to a slave she didn't fully trust that something might happen near the stables in 2 days. Marcus let slip to another worker that only the strongest few were involved. Old Thomas, who rarely spoke to anyone, suddenly mentioned to a house slave that Saturday night, "When the moon is full, some folks were planning something foolish." Sure enough, the information traveled. Peter heard fragments and reported them to Clayton, feeling secure in his position as loyal informant. The overseer positioned extra men near the stables, planned to keep more guards awake Saturday night, felt confident he'd crush the rebellion before it started. But the real plan would happen Friday night. Not at the stables, but at multiple points simultaneously, and it would involve every ally they had. "My father has been in that shed for 2 weeks," Big Samuel told Grace and Marcus on Thursday night. The smell of approaching rain filled the air, and thunder rumbled in the distance. "We attack tomorrow. No more waiting. Either we get free or we die trying." Grace looked at this giant of a man with something like awe. "You really mean that, all of us? All who choose to come?" Big Samuel corrected. "Freedom is a choice, even a dangerous one." Friday evening came with heavy clouds covering the moon. Perfect conditions for violence. The kitchen women served the evening meal with even more alcohol than usual. The overseers, already tired from extra patrol duties, drank gratefully. The whiskey was cheap and strong, and by 10:00, half of them were struggling to stay alert. 2 overseers got into a loud argument over a slave girl, both claiming rights to her. The argument drew attention, created exactly the kind of distraction needed. Clayton had to separate them, which meant the head overseer's attention was divided. The children slaves moved through the grounds with water buckets, doing evening tasks that no one questioned. No one noticed they were positioning those buckets at specific locations near specific buildings, all containing items that would be needed soon. Big Samuel moved through the darkness at the plantation's edge, every muscle coiled. He'd gone over the plan 100 times. Now it was just execution. The signal came at midnight. One of the kitchen women accidentally knocked over an oil lamp in the outdoor kitchen area. The flame caught on dry straw, not enough to burn buildings, but enough to create smoke-light confusion. Someone shouted. Guards turned toward the fire. That's when old Thomas, inside the punishment shed, forced the weakened lock one final time. The metal snapped with a sound like a breaking bone. Moses, who'd been conserving his strength for 2 weeks, pushed the door open and stepped into the night air. At the same moment, Big Samuel emerged from behind the barn. The first overseer never saw him coming. Big Samuel struck with the butt of his rifle. A single precise blow to the temple. The man dropped silently. Big Samuel caught his rifle before it clattered to the ground, muffling the sound against his chest. A second overseer, responding to the fire, ran around the corner directly into one of the tripwire traps. He went down hard, his scream cutting through the night as he landed on the nail-embedded board Big Samuel had hidden there. The cry mixed with the sudden sound of a cow someone had deliberately released. Chaos upon chaos. Marcus and 3 other strong men broke free of their deliberately weakened chains. The metal links snapped with sounds like gunshots. They moved toward the weapons storage shed using tools Marcus had prepared and hidden. The lock was old, rusted. It gave way after 2 hard strikes from a sledgehammer. Suddenly, slaves who'd spent years cowering were holding axes, hammers, tools that could split wood or split skulls. The women threw the carefully positioned water buckets onto specific patches of dry hay and wood, then lit them with embers they'd kept hidden in clay pots. Not massive fires. Controlled burns meant to create smoke, fear, confusion without destroying the cotton that was everyone's livelihood. The smoke rose quickly, thick and dark, carrying the smell of burning hay and terror. Master Whitmore burst from the main house in his nightshirt, shotgun in hand, screaming orders. Behind him came more overseers, some still drunk, all of them confused by the multiple emergencies erupting simultaneously. The slaves are rebelling.
Get the dogs!
That's when Moses appeared in the firelight. Free, standing tall despite 2 weeks of imprisonment, despite beatings and humiliation. His shirt hung in tatters, revealing whip scars old and new. But his eyes were clear, sharp, alive. And behind him, emerging from the smoke like a nightmare made flesh, Big Samuel. Over 7 feet of muscle and determination, holding a rifle. His face set in an expression of absolute purpose. Master Whitmore's face went pale, his mouth opened and closed like a fish drowning in air. "You, Benjamin, has a son. My name is Moses," the old man said quietly. The firelight danced across his weathered face. "And yes, you should have let me stay free." Whitmore raised his shotgun toward Big Samuel, and his next words carried across the plantation loud enough for every slave to hear. "That boy is my property too. Born of my slave, which makes him mine by law. Clayton, kill them both." That declaration changed everything. It wasn't just about one family anymore. It was about the principal master. Whitmore had just announced to everyone that freedom was an illusion, that children born free could still be claimed as property, that no one who had ever been touched by slavery would ever truly escape its reach. The slaves who'd been wavering, uncertain, afraid, preparing to run if things went wrong. They heard those words and something broke inside them. Or maybe something broke free. Grace, who'd been ready to flee if needed, instead picked up a fallen overseer's whip. She cracked it toward Clayton as he aimed his rifle at Big Samuel. The leather caught his arm, spoiling his shot. The bullet went wide, punching into a wooden post. David, the fast boy, kicked over another lamp, spreading fire to a section of fence, opening a gap in the perimeter. Sarah, the old kitchen woman, emerged from the main house with Master Whitmore's own pistol, which she'd stolen from his study. She didn't know how to shoot it, but just holding it made 2 overseers hesitate, uncertain. Before we continue, if you've made it this far, comment, "Freedom," so I know who you are. Thank you, and let's keep going. The battle that followed wasn't clean or heroic. It was brutal, ugly, desperate. Shots rang out, deafening in the night. One of Marcus's allies took a bullet in the chest and fell, blood spreading across his shirt in the firelight. A woman was shoved to the ground by an overseer and would have been trampled by a panicked horse if Grace hadn't hit the man with a shovel, the metal ringing against his skull. Big Samuel moved through it all with calculated violence. He didn't shoot wildly. Every shot counted, every bullet precious. He aimed for the overseers coordinating the defense. First Clayton, the leader. Big Samuel's shot took him in the shoulder, spinning him around and dropping him into the dirt, his rifle clattering away. Then the man controlling the dogs. A shot to the leg that brought him down, screaming. Without coordination, the dogs scattered. Some attacked whoever screamed loudest, unable to distinguish friend from foe in the chaos. Others simply ran away from the fire and smoke, their hunting instincts overwhelmed by panic. Moses, despite his age and weakness, fought like a man possessed. He'd spent 30 years free and would die before going back to chains. Using a knife Marcus had given him, he fought with a lifetime of suppressed rage finally unleashed. He wasn't trying to kill. He was trying to survive, to give his son time to protect the people who'd risked everything. But Big Samuel's true genius showed in his strategy. He wasn't trying to kill everyone or burn everything down. He was creating a corridor, a path from the punishment shed through the chaos toward the west fence, where he'd already weakened the posts. Anyone who wants freedom,
Follow me.
he roared, his voice cutting through the screams and gunfire.
No, this is your only chance.
Some ran immediately, Grace pulling her mother and helping her father, Marcus carrying the wounded man, who was still breathing, despite the chest wound. Old Thomas moving surprisingly fast for his age, David and 6 others, their faces set with determination born of desperation. But some froze, too scared, too conditioned to obedience, too uncertain that freedom was even possible, that this giant man could actually lead them to safety. They stood paralyzed while the world burned around them. Big Samuel saw them and felt his heart break. But his father was beside him now, and Grace's family, and 15 others who'd chosen to risk everything. He couldn't wait. Every second was life or death.
Last chance.
He shouted once more, his voice raw. A few more ran, spurred by that final call. But at least 10 stayed, paralyzed by fear or simply unable to break the psychological chains that bound them more securely than any iron. Big Samuel saw them, truly saw them, and felt the weight of it. But survival meant moving. Go, Moses told his son, reading the hesitation in Big Samuel's face. Get them out. Not without you. I'm right behind you, boy. Go. Big Samuel led the charge toward the west fence. He'd prepared the escape route, carefully 3 horses with loosened tethers, a wagon with its best wheel damaged but functional enough for a desperate run, and the fence itself weakened at specific points. Behind them, the plantation descended into complete chaos. Buildings burned with controlled fires that created walls of smoke. Livestock ran free, adding to the confusion. Overseers shouted contradictory orders, and the slaves who'd stayed behind now had to be dealt with carefully. They were valuable property after all, and killing them meant more financial loss. That hesitation, that calculation of property value, bought the escapees precious minutes. They crashed through the weak fence section. Wood splintered and cracked. Big Samuel lifted 2 small children, who couldn't climb fast enough, and threw them bodily over the remaining obstacle. Grace helped her mother up and over. Marcus carried the wounded man over his shoulders like a sack of grain. Moses was last, covering their retreat. His old rifle fired measured shots that kept the overseers at a distance, making them take cover instead of pursuing. Then they were through. Into the darkness, into the forest that Big Samuel knew like his own heartbeat. Behind them, the sounds of pursuit began. Dogs barking, men shouting, horses being saddled. But Big Samuel had one final surprise prepared. Throughout his week of observation, he'd prepared a secondary trap system on the most likely pursuit paths. Covered pits that could break a horse's leg, tripwires in the dark that would send riders flying, false trails leading to dead ends and thick brush. The first pursuing horseman hit a wire and went down hard, his scream cutting short as his neck broke in the fall. His horse screamed too, a sound that sent chills through everyone who heard it. The second group of dogs ran into a pit trap Big Samuel had covered with branches and leaves. 3 dogs fell in, their yelps of pain and fear echoing through the forest. It wouldn't stop the pursuit forever, but it would slow them enough. "Keep moving," Big Samuel ordered, his voice urgent but controlled. "We've got 10 miles to cover before dawn, and they'll be coming with everything they have." They didn't stop running until the sun rose. By then, they were deep in the mountains, following paths Big Samuel knew would be nearly impossible for outsiders to track. Paths that looked like animal trails, that crossed streams multiple times to confuse the dogs, that led through terrain so rough that horses couldn't follow. The wounded man had died during the night. Marcus had carried his body for over an hour, refusing to leave him until Grace gently told him they had to let go, that the living needed all their energy to survive. They'd started with 17 people. Now they were 16. Big Samuel found a hidden valley just after sunrise, a place he'd discovered years ago while hunting, with water, game, and enough concealment that they could rest without being easily seen. Moses collapsed against a tree, his body finally giving out. Big Samuel knelt beside him, checking for injuries beyond exhaustion. "We made it, Papa," Big Samuel said softly. Moses looked at his son with eyes that held both pride and sorrow. "We made it, but we left people behind." The words hung in the air like smoke. That night, around a carefully hidden fire that produced almost no smoke, they counted their blessings and their losses. 16 people free, but dozens left behind. Some who'd helped but been too scared to run, some too old to make the journey, some too young, some simply too broken to believe freedom was possible. And one man dead during the escape. His name whispered like a prayer. Thomas. His name was Thomas. Grace sat beside Big Samuel. Her mother and father and brother huddled nearby. In the firelight, her face looked both younger and older than her 20 years. "Do you think we did the right thing?" she asked quietly. "We didn't save everyone. We left people behind." Big Samuel was quiet for a long time, staring into the flames. The smell of wood smoke mixed with the scent of pine and earth. Somewhere in the darkness, an owl called. "Finally," he spoke, "my father spent 30 years free, 30 years living like a man instead of property. He taught me that freedom isn't something given. It's something taken, something fought for, something that comes with impossible choices." He looked around at the exhausted faces. "We didn't save everyone. We saved the ones willing to risk everything for the chance to live free. The others." His voice caught. "Maybe they'll find their courage one day. Maybe they won't. But we can't carry people to freedom. They have to walk there themselves." Moses placed a hand on his son's massive shoulder. Even sitting, Big Samuel towered over his father. "You did what I taught you," Moses said, his voice rough with exhaustion and emotion. "You survived. You fought, and you got your old man back." "We got each other back," Big Samuel corrected. A sound from the edge of their camp made everyone freeze. But it was just Ruth arriving on the horse Big Samuel had left for her, at a predetermined meeting point. She'd insisted on traveling despite her injuries, refusing to stay behind. When Ruth saw Moses alive, she broke down completely. The tears came in great heaving sobs as they held each other. 30 years of partnership, of survival, of love that had endured through impossible circumstances. Big Samuel looked away, giving them privacy, and found himself watching Grace's family, her father Marcus, hands scarred from the forge, holding his wife Sarah close, her brother David, only 14, sleeping against a tree with the exhaustion of someone who'd run for his life. All of them together for the first time in years, without chains or masters watching. They were building something. Not what they'd lost. Not what had been taken from them, but something new. Something that belonged only to them. Miles away, as dawn broke over the Whitmore plantation, Master Whitmore stood in the ruins of his barn, staring at the destruction. 3 buildings damaged by fire. 4 overseers injured, 1 dead. 16 slaves escaped. Over 30 arsenalers in property gone. His prized translator, the man he'd spent 30 years trying to reclaim, vanished again. But more than the financial loss, more than the embarrassment, what truly terrified Whitmore was the look in the eyes of the slaves who remained. Fear, yes, but also a question. If 16 could escape, why not more? That question would haunt Whitmore Plantation for years. Some slaves would stay, too broken or too practical to risk death in the wilderness. But others would remember that night. Remember that a 7-foot tall man had walked out of the forest and turned an impossible plan into freedom for those brave enough to take it. And in territories far to the west, in hidden valleys and mountain camps, stories would begin to circulate. Stories of Big Samuel, the giant who came from the wilderness to save his father. Stories of slaves who chose death over chains. Stories that kept the idea of freedom alive, even in the darkest places. Years later, Big Samuel would teach others what Moses had taught him. How to survive, how to fight, how to stay free. The hidden valley became a way station for other runaways. A place where freedom wasn't just a dream, but a tangible reality you could touch and taste and defend. Grace became his partner in all things, though they never formally married. They'd both learned that the trappings of civilization often meant traps. Her family became his family. The children born in that valley grew up knowing only freedom, though their parents made sure they understood the cost it had required. Moses lived another 15 years in that valley, teaching anyone who would listen about languages, about thinking strategically, about surviving in a world that wanted to break you. He died peacefully in his sleep, surrounded by family, having tasted more years of freedom than slavery. Big Samuel never became a hero in the traditional sense. No monuments were built to him. No history books recorded his name. He lived the rest of his life in hiding, always watchful, always ready. But in the whispered conversations of the enslaved, in the nightmares of slave catchers, in the quiet pride of those who'd escaped and lived to tell about it, Big Samuel's name meant something. It meant that freedom wasn't just a dream. It was something you could fight for, if you were willing to pay the price. Even if that price was blood, loss, and the weight of those you couldn't save. As Big Samuel sat by the fire that first night of freedom, surrounded by people who'd risked everything on his word, he understood something his father had tried to teach him all along. Freedom isn't clean. It isn't fair. It doesn't save everyone. But for those who taste it, even once, even at the cost of everything else, it's worth more than life itself. And that's a truth no master, no overseer, no amount of chains or laws or violence could ever change. Some prices are worth paying. Some battles are worth fighting, even when you can't save everyone. That night, 16 people slept as free men and women for the first time in their lives, or the first time in decades. They slept with full bellies from the food Big Samuel had cached, with clean water from the stream, with the sounds of the forest around them instead of the sound of chains. and if their dreams were haunted by the faces of those left behind. Well, that too was part of the price of freedom. A price Big Samuel would carry for the rest of his life, along with the knowledge that he'd done what he could, saved who he could, and given them all something no master could ever take away again: the chance to choose their own path, even if that path led through blood and fire to an uncertain future. Freedom. Real, hard-won, precious freedom.